Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to be showing you how to add new melee weapons to Survival Game Kit V2. This video is for Unreal Engine 5 and for Survival Game Kit V2 versions that are 2.4 or newer. If you're using Unreal Engine 4 or if you're using an older version of Survival Game Kit V2, there'll be a video linked in the description that you can follow instead. To follow along with this video, you'll need the mesh for your new melee weapon. So you can see in my new weapon folder here, I've got a sword. This is from the Infinity Blade assets that you can find for free on the marketplace. So to get started, we're going to go to Survival Game Kit, Blueprints, Items, Holdable Items. And in here is where we have all of our holdable item blueprints. For this video, we're going to be duplicating one of the existing melee weapons. That way we already have a lot of the settings already set up for us, and then we can go in and change them however we want. So I'm going to be duplicating the BP axe, so we'll right click and do duplicate, and I'm going to name mine BP underscore new weapon, like that, and we'll open it up. I'll just bring that over here. Then we're just going to double click any of our components to open up our viewport. You can see that I've got my axe currently set here. So what we're going to do is change the mesh. So I'll select the static mesh component and change this to our new mesh. Then I'm just going to reset the rotation values like that. And you can see our rotation is different from what the axe was, but that's fine. We'll adjust the character socket to account for that. If you're using a skeletal mesh, you will need to add a skeletal mesh component. So if you search for skeletal, you can add a skeletal mesh component. You want to drag it to the attach point here. Then you'll be able to set your skeletal mesh here. You could then delete the static mesh that's here and add these, or you could move these melee tray sockets to your skeletal mesh, and then you could delete the static mesh. If you do this, you will need to go to the holdable, then holdable mesh, and you'll need to get your skeletal mesh and just connect it up to here. If you're using a static mesh, you won't need to do this, but that's just a quick example of how you can set up a skeletal mesh. So I'll go back to my viewport. I'm just going to undo the changes I just did. Then we're going to adjust our melee tray sockets. So we want these to be around where the blade is. So I'm just going to roughly put mine about here. I'm going to move it up a little bit like that. And I'm going to move the second socket, again, just roughly on the blade. Move this up to the top like that. And move it a little bit closer. Now you can add additional melee tray sockets, so we can duplicate and we can move this down into the blade. So we've got some additional sockets here. And I'll duplicate this again and move this down a bit more like that. And the way these melee trace sockets work is when the attack animation is played, those trace sockets will draw a trace, and if that trace hits something, then it will deal damage to it. So you want to make sure that you've got a decent number of these melee sockets along your blade of your weapon. Next, we're going to go to our character skeleton. So for the survival game kit, that's in the meshes, skeletal, then scroll down and find the mannequin. If you're using a custom skeleton for your character, you'll need to go to that instead. Then we're going to find our hand, so that's around here. We're going to right click it and do add socket, and we're going to name this to our weapon's name, so hand underscore our new weapon, like that. Now we're going to right click that socket, go to add preview asset, and we're going to add our sword to this. So I'm going to search for sword. I'm going to add that. You can see that it gives us a preview of what the sword will look like when it's attached to this socket. So with our socket selected, we're going to roughly get it where we think that our sword will want to be. So I'm going to put mine sort of, might help if I turn down the camera speed a little bit here. So roughly around there, like that. And I'm also going to rotate mine about 90 degrees like that. So once you've got your socket and the place that you want your weapon to attach to, we can just right click and do remove all attached assets like that. Then we're going to copy our socket name. So we'll just copy that, go back to our weapon holdable, and in the class defaults, we're going to search for socket, and we want to make sure that we set held socket to our new socket name like that. Then we'll compile. Next, we need to set up the new item for our sword. So we're going to go to the item list, which is in Survival Game Kit, Blueprints, Items. Then we've got our item list here. I'll just bring that over here. Next, we're just going to duplicate one of the existing melee weapons. That way it's already got all of our stuff set up for us and we can just go in and tweak the things that we need. So I'm going to find the weapon axe and I'm going to duplicate that. And then I'm going to double click the row name and I'm just going to rename it to weapon underscore new weapon, like that. You can call this your weapon's name. Then with our new weapon row selected, in here we can set things like the name, the description, weight, item size. We can also set the static mesh that will be used when the item is on the ground. So I'm going to change this from axe to my sword, like that. Next, we're going to go down to the holdable details. And in here, we're going to go to the holdable class and we want to change this. So we want to set this to our new weapon blueprint. So I'm going to search for BP underscore new weapon. And then in here, we can set some of our settings for our holdable. So we've got our holdable slots. These are the weapon slots that the weapon can equip to. So we've got both primary and secondary. You can change these or remove these if you like. Then we've got our holdable slot sockets. So this is the socket on our character skeleton that the sword will be attached to when it's in our primary weapon slot, and then the same for our secondary weapon slot. So if you wanted to, you could go to the character, add a new socket for your sword that it will use when it's equipped to a weapon slot, and then you could set that socket name here and you could have a different location for your sword. Then we've got our equipped and unequipped animations here, so you can change these if you like. And then we've got only holdable when equipped. This means that if the sword is in our backpack, for example, we won't be able to hold it. It will have to be equipped to a weapon slot for our player to be able to hold that item. Now, there are lots of other settings you can change in here to customize your item. I'm not going to be covering them in this video because there is a separate video that goes through how to add new items that explains all of these different settings, how to change things like the icons, which you can do down here. So if you want to check that out, that's in the documentation. So next we need to create a world item for our new weapon. So we'll go to showcase, then in our items folder, we're going to find the world items. And in here, we're going to create a child of the static master item. Now, if you're using a skeletal mesh for your weapon, you'll need to use the skeletal master item instead. But since I'm using a static mesh, I'm going to be using the static master item. So we'll right click and do create child blueprint class. And I'm going to name this BP underscore new weapon underscore WI, like that. Now I'll just get rid of this search and I'm going to search for new weapon and we'll open that up. And in here in the class defaults under item, we're going to set the row name to the new row we just created. So weapon underscore new weapon, like that. And you can see we've got our sword. Now right now our sword is standing upright. This will mean that when it's dropped on the ground, it will be stood up. So we probably want to change this so it's laying flat. To do that, we'll go back to the item list, select our new weapon row and scroll down to near the bottom, and we've got the item offsets. This allows us to change the rotation of the item when it's dropped on the ground. So I'm going to try -90 in the Y, and we'll go to the showcase and I'm going to drag my weapon into the level. You can see that now it's laying flat on the ground. This might not update. You may have to close it and then reopen it. For it to update, you'll have to click Open Full Blueprint Editor. Go to Viewport, you can see that now it's updated in our new weapon world item blueprint. So that's how you can adjust the rotations. You may have to change it in a different value depending on your mesh. You can also increase, say, the height. So say right now our sword is kind of going into the ground a bit. I can increase the Z, say by 3. And then we'll go back to our showcase. We'll have to delete this item and then replace it. You can see that now it pops up out of the ground, so you can tweak that and get the values that you need. Next we can test our item, make sure that we can actually interact with it. So I'm just going to run over to my sword. You can see when I look at it, I don't get any options to select it. Now if your sword already has collision, you should see your options show up, but mine doesn't. So we're going to quickly add that. I'm just going to go to my sword mesh, and in here I'm going to go show, and I'm going to tick on simple collision. You can see nothing's showing up. So I just need to go to collision and I can add a collision to our mesh. I'm just going to use a box simplified. You see that now we've got a collision for our mesh. If I save that and hit play now and run over to our sword, you can see now we've got our options showing up. Now, if you're using a skeletal mesh, you won't be able to do it that way. You'll have to right-click your skeletal mesh and select the create, then physics asset, and create and assign physics asset. So I can quickly show you that here if we find a skeletal mesh. So you'll right-click your weapon, go to create, physics asset, then create and assign. And that will create a new physics asset for your skeletal mesh. Next, we need to set up our animation blueprint for our new weapon. So to do that, I'm just going to get rid of this search here, go to Survival Game Kit, Animations, Layers, and in here you can see we've got animation blueprints for all of our different holdable weapons. Since we duplicated the sword when we created our holdable blueprint, I'm going to be doing the same thing here. So we'll duplicate our axe, and we'll call this New Weapon Anim Layers. So New Weapon Anim Layers, and we'll open that up. And in here is where we actually set our animations for our sword to use. So in our class defaults, you can see we've got our third person category, and if I just hide the do not edit and scroll down, you can see we've got our first person category. And this is where we can set the animations that will be used by our character when we actually hold this sword. So we've got options for different stances, so depending on your character's stance, we can set different animations. For melee weapons, by default, they only use combat animations. So if we open that up, you can see we've got options for idle animations, movement animations, jump, and then overlay animations. So if you wanted to change your third person animations, this is where you would do it. Our overlay animations, basically they allow us to change the animation that our arms and head play on our character, but they don't affect our movement animations. And this is useful for, say, if you had a new melee weapon, but you only had an idle, for example, and you didn't have a full set of movement animations, you could just use the idle animation in these overlays, which will take control of the character's arms and heads, but the movement animations will still be used for the rest of the body. So you can continue using, say, the axe movement animations while having your arms play a different animation. If these overlay animations are set to none, then they won't be used, and our normal movement animations up here will be used instead for our arms and head. Then if you wanted to, you can change the standard animations. They have the exact same options, as does the aimed animations as well. Then moving down, we've got our first person animations. So in here, much like the third person, we've got the same options for different stance animations. If we open one of those up, you can see we can set our idle, movement, and jump animations down here. And these will just be used for our first person arms. Next, scrolling back up to our third person settings here, we've got our aim offset. So by default, all of the weapons in Survival Game Kit use procedural aim offsets, and that's what controls the direction that our character looks in, so it looks in the same direction as our camera. Now, if you want to, you can set this to standard and use the normal aim offset animations that you can set down here. But for this video, I'm just going to be leaving this as procedural. Then we've got turn in place animations. These allow you to set what turn in place animations will be used when we're holding this weapon. Then we've got hand IKs and elbow IKs. I'll come back to that in a little bit. We've got body blending. So this controls what part of the body the aim offset is applied to. So if this is set to spine, then our whole character's upper body will look in the direction the camera is looking. If we were to change this to neck, then only the character's head would look in the direction the camera is facing. For melee weapons, you're pretty much always going to want this to be spine. Then moving down, we've got a few extra settings. We've got disable right hand IK sprinting. If this is enabled, then our right hand IK will be disabled when our character sprints. Moving further down, we've got left hand sockets. So if you are using left hand IKs, these are the sockets on the weapon mesh that will be used to set the left hand's location. Then we've got some debug settings here that can give you some useful information in game. Then we've got the adjust settings, which we'll be using a little bit later. This allows you to adjust the hand IKs. Then we've got the weapon sway. For melee weapons, I generally advise keeping this turned off. This option is more for ranged weapons to give some delay as the character looks around, which makes the weapon feel like it has a bit more weight to it. Then moving further down, we've got some hand bone names. You shouldn't have to change these unless you change your character mesh. But basically this option here should be your right hand bone name, and this should be your head bone name. Then we've got our first person category again. You can see this is where we'd set our animations. Then we've got separate hand IK and elbow IK settings just for our first person view. So if you do want to change the animations, this is where you would come and do that. You can pause the video now and start changing them out if you like. But currently our new weapon won't actually be using this animation blueprint. We need to tell it to use it. So what we'll do is just compile, go back to our weapon blueprint, class defaults, and we're going to search for animation layers. And here is where we set what animation layer we want our weapon to use. Now you can see we've got a skeletal mesh here, and this basically allows you to add multiple entries. Say for example you had 2 character meshes and you wanted them to use different animations, you could use this to set which skeletal mesh you want to use which animation blueprint. But for this video I'm just going to be doing this for mannequin, so I'm going to delete this extra one. Click this down arrow and hit delete. And then we're going to change this from our axe anim layers to our new weapon anim layers instead. And now we can actually test this out, so I'm just going to compile. As a side note, if you did change the animations in here, make sure you compile this blueprint before we play an editor, otherwise the changes might not apply. So we're just going to hit play, and we're going to run over and grab our sword. I'm just going to select hold, and you can see we're holding our sword. If I attack, it's playing our attack animation. Now you may want to tweak your hand socket further. If we do Shift F1 and eject, we can check to see how close our socket is to our hand. As you can see, it's a little bit further away than we would like. So I'm just going to go back to our character skeleton, and I'm just going to move the window down here a little bit so we can see what we're doing while playing. So I'll move it to about here, hit select showcase, and then we can actually move this socket while the gameplay is running, and we can see exactly where our sword will land. So you can move it back a little bit, maybe move it a little bit more this way, something like that. Obviously you can spend as long as you like getting this exactly where you want it to be. Next I'll show you how to adjust the hand IKs. So we're just going to save our mannequin here and just drag it back up to the top because we will be using this in a minute. We'll go to our animation blueprint, and in here I'm going to be editing the third person IKs. So we'll go to the IKs option here, and in here is where we can set our weapon to use the right and left hand IKs, so we can enable and disable those here. And then down here we've got the third person hand IK and aimed right hand IK. Now these are used to tell the hand or the right hand where we want it to be when we're holding this weapon. Now since this is a melee weapon, it doesn't use the aimed right hand, so we can ignore that. And you can see because we duplicate the axe, the right hand IK option is turned on. If you don't want to use the right hand IK, you can just untick this and it will use the right hand location from your movement animations. But if you do want to use the right hand IK and you want to adjust it, what we can do is make sure that right hand IK is ticked on. Then we're going to scroll down to the debug category, and we're going to tick on adjust right hand IK like that. Then we're going to scroll back up to where we've got our third person right hand IK settings, and we're going to copy the location. We're going to go to our character skeleton here. I'm just going to zoom out, and in the skeleton tree we're going to search for hand and select the right hand IK socket, and we'll paste in that location here, and then we'll go back to our animation blueprint and copy the rotation and paste that in here like that. Then we're just going to grab this window and I'm going to move it down to the corner again, so about here like that. Then we're going to go back to showcase, and you can see that the game is actually still running, but if you closed yours that's fine. I'm just going to exit mine and I'll relaunch it. I'm going to run over and grab our sword and select hold. So now we can do Shift F1 and we can start moving our socket about, and it will actually change our hand position in game. So you can use this to get the hand exactly where you want it to be. So say you wanted it to be about here, you can also rotate it. So if you wanted to rotate the hand, you can do that. So say I wanted mine to be about here. Once you're happy with the location that you've selected, we can right click relative location, do copy, go back to the animation blueprint. I'm just going to move this window over here, and you can paste that into the third person right hand IK location. Then do the same thing with rotation and paste that into rotation. So now in the future, whenever we hold our sword, its right hand will go to wherever you just set it using the socket here. Now you need to make sure that you untick under debug, make sure that you untick adjust right hand IK once you've finished adjusting the IKs like that. Now, if we also wanted to adjust the first person IKs, we can scroll down to first person, open up the hand IKs, then first person right hand IK. And in here, we can copy the location, paste that to relative location, copy the rotation, paste that to relative rotation, and then we'll move this back over here. We can go in game. I'm going to press V to enter first person and shift F1 to release my mouse. I'll just kind of move this over here. And you can see when I start moving, oh, one thing we forgot to do is in the animation blueprint, make sure that you've enabled the adjust right hand IK like that. And then we can start moving our hand IK in the first person view. So you can get it to wherever you like. So we can move it about. And once you're happy with that location, say about here, you can just copy the location, go back to the animation blueprint, and then we're going to paste that into the first person right hand IK. And we'll copy the rotation and paste that into the rotation. And then once we're finished, just make sure that we untick the adjust right hand IK like that. Next, I'll show you how to adjust the elbow IKs. So we'll scroll up here and we'll open up the elbow IKs category. And in here, we've got a right and left elbow IK setting. So to adjust these, we'll just copy our right elbow IK. Then I'm going to go to our mannequin and we're going to search for elbow, select the right elbow IK and paste in that location to the relative location. Then in our animation blueprint, we're going to go down to debug and turn on adjust elbow IK like that. And I'm going to move my window back over here. And in game, I'm going to go back to third person view. I'm going to do shift F1 and I can start moving around my elbow IK to get the location that I want. So say I want it about here. Once I'm happy with that, I can copy this and I can paste that into the right hand elbow IK location. If you wanted to adjust the left elbow IK, you'd do exactly the same thing, but instead of using the right elbow IK, you would use the left elbow IK, and then you would paste the value that you're happy with from the relative location into the left elbow IK. Now, the left elbow IK isn't actually used unless the use left hand IK option is enabled. Now, since this is a one-handed melee weapon, I don't recommend enabling this because we don't really have anywhere for our left hand to go. So we won't need to adjust our left hand IK, but if you did want to, you can. Then moving down to first person, we have exactly the same options for the elbow IKs down here. So if you wanted to adjust these, you'd follow the same steps, but instead of copying the values from the third person, you'd copy them from here, paste them into your sockets, move them, and then once you're happy, you can copy these values and paste them into the first person options here. Then moving a little bit down, we've got the use standard elbow IKs. Basically, this just allows you to, if this option's enabled, you can set different IK values for your elbows when your character's in the standard stance. Most melee weapons don't have a standard stance, so you probably won't need to adjust these. So that's pretty much it for the animation settings. Once you're happy with everything, we'll just exit out of Plan Editor. Once you're happy with everything, you can compile, save, and just double check that you untick both the adjust options here, so everything works correctly. Next, we'll just go back to our melee weapon, and I'm just going to quickly go through the settings that we have in here that control how our melee weapon works. So I'm just going to get rid of this search. Starting off, we've got our melee attack animations here. This is where you can set your attack animations for your melee weapon. So if you wanted to change them, you could do that here. If you wanted to add new animations, you could click the plus button and set your attack montage here, and it will randomly select between the montages you have set. Now, if you are changing these animations or added to them, there's a guide in the documentation for adding new melee animations that you'll need to read, because there are changes to your animation that you'll need to do. Then we've got crouch melee attack animations, so these are the animations used if your character is crouched. Moving down, we've got our melee traces settings, so this is how frequently the traces run in seconds. Then we've got the melee trace channel, which is set to weapon. Then we've got our harvesting settings, so currently this weapon can harvest wood. You can see right here it says wood. If you don't want your weapon to harvest resources, you can just untick this. If you do want it to harvest resources, this is where you can set that. So I'll just delete this. You can add a new resource here. You can set the type, so say you wanted it to be able to collect iron, you could set that here. Then you could set the amounts that it will collect from the iron ore. And if you don't want it to collect anything, you can just click this trash can icon. Then we've got some debug settings, so you can turn on the traces to be visible in game, which can be helpful if your weapon isn't hitting the things that you want it to. Moving down, we've got the damage values, so this is where you set the damage that the weapon will do depending on the hitbox it hits. So you can see, for example, the head hitbox, it will do between 5 and 10 damage. Then moving down, we've got our bleed settings, so you can have the weapon apply a bleed. You can choose how long the bleed will last for, whether or not the bleed is a random chance of happening. So if this is off, it means the weapon will apply a bleed every time. If this is on, then it will use the bleed apply chance. So 0.5 would be 50% of the time the weapon hits someone, it will apply a bleed. And then we've got the bleed length, so this is how long the bleed will last for. Down here we've got our hit surface sounds, so these are the sounds that will be played when this melee weapon hits a particular surface. So for example, here we've got it set to wood and it will play the tree hit sound, and we've got stone and it will play the stone hit sound. We've also got options for decals. Currently there aren't any set, but if you wanted to set different decals depending on what the weapon hits, you could do that here. And then we've got the same for particles. You can see if it hits flesh, it will spawn the blood particle effect. And then you can choose things like the decal sizes and how long the decals will last. Then we've got the durability. So if this is turned on, then the item's durability will decrease by this amount each time it hits something. We've got stances here. So the default stance is combat. You can turn on and off if the stance can change, and you can change whether or not the character can attack while in standard stance. Then moving down, we've got a held socket that we changed earlier. We've got sway for melee weapons. I don't recommend turning this on, but as I explained earlier, this basically adds a little bit of delay when your character looks around to the weapon to give it a feeling of weight. Then we've got our leaning settings, so if you wanted to enable leaning, you could do that here, and then you could control how much the character will lean. Clipping, this is used to stop the weapon going through walls that are close to the player, so if you wanted to enable that, you could do that here, and then you could adjust how close the character can be to a wall before the weapon clips, and it will turn the weapon away from the wall. So if you wanted to enable that, you could do that here. Then we've got our movement speeds, so you can set the different movement speeds depending on the character's state. Currently you can see use holdable movement speeds is unticked, so even if we change these, it wouldn't actually affect the character. So if you do change these, you want to make sure that this option is turned on. And then lastly, we've got our camera shake options down here. So this allows you to control how much the camera shakes when, say, idle, walking and sprinting. If you don't want to use these at all, you can untick this option and there won't be camera shake. And if you want to find out more about how you adjust these values, there's documentation on camera shake that you can take a look at. So our melee weapon is pretty much all set up now. I will show you quickly how to do one thing, and that's if we hit play, I'm just going to change this to spawn our character at the camera, and we pick up we equip our weapon. You can see currently it's horizontal. You may want to change this. So we're going to go to the item list, and we're going to select our new weapon row, and in the holdable details, we can change the socket that we want to use. So for example, if I change this to primary new weapon socket, I'm just going to copy that name, go to our character skeleton, so go to meshes, skeletal, and scroll down and find the mannequin. I'm going to select the spine 5, right click, do add socket, and we'll rename that socket to the name we just copied, and then we can choose the location that our weapon will go to when it goes in that primary weapon slot. So I'll move it here and we'll test this out. I'll hit play, equip our weapon. You can see that it's in this location currently. If I do Shift F1, we'll grab our mannequin window here, just move this down, and we can start adjusting this to get it where we want. So I can say rotate it, maybe like that, rotate it this way around, like that, and maybe move it to the side, move it closer to our character, maybe something like that. And you can use this to adjust your unequipped weapon sockets. Then if you wanted to do the same thing, you could just create another new socket for your secondary slot and adjust that in here as well. So that's going to be it for this video. Hopefully you guys found this helpful, and if you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment below.